parsha starts getting into the nitty-gritty of Pesach story. Right? So always when it comes to Shabbos Parshas Vayera, wife says, "Oh, we're up to Pesach already. Let's start cleaning. Let's start Pesach cleaning already. And this year I have the extra few weeks." Anyway, one of the major mitzvahs actually we have on Seder night is derived from the beginning of this week's parsha. And that is, Pasuk says, Kadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, "Lachei emor livnei Yisrael." Therefore, tell the Bnei Yisrael, "Ani Hashem, v'hoitzeisi eschem mitachas sivros Mitzrayim." I'm going to take you out from beneath the burdens of Mitzrayim. V'tzalti eschem, and I'm going to save you, deliver you, me'avodosam, from their servitude. V'goalti eschem, and I'm going to redeem you, b'zroa netuya, with an outstretched arm, b'shvatim gedolim, with great judgments. V'lokachti eschem li la'om, and I'm going to take you for me as a people. V'yisi lochem le'lechem, and I will be for you as God. So there are four expressions over here mentioned. V'itzeisi, v'itzalti, v'goalti, v'lokachti. And that, Chazal said, therefore we have to have 4 cups of wine on Seder night to commemorate these 4 expressions of redemption, delivery. I, v'itzeisi, v'itzalti, v'goalti, v'lokachti. A number of commentaries, number of Mefarshim, most notably the Maharal, explain that these 4 expressions are not just 4 expressions. These were actually 4 separate stages in the redemption of Klal Yisrael from Egypt. And what were they? So let's go back in reverse order. When the Jewish people were in Egypt, right, and they were subjected to hard labor, to servitude and hard labor, this had been prophesied to Avram Avinu. It's been told to Avram Avinu in the Bris Bein Habsor, in the bris, the covenant between the pieces. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Avram Avinu, Yodea Teda, you should be aware, Ki ger yeh zaracha, be'eretz lo Elohim, that they're going to be strangers in a foreign land, a land that doesn't belong to them. Ger yeh zaracha be'eretz lo Elohim. Va'avodum, and they're going to serve them. Ve'inu oisom, and they are going to subject them to hard labor. They're going to afflict them. They're going to subject them to affliction, to hard labor. Arba me'ez shana, for 400 years. That's what the Pasuk says. So it says the Maharal, you see there were 3 stages, 3 things which were promised to Avram Avinu that's going to happen to his descendants. Ger yeh zaracha, your descendants are going to be strangers, gerim. Right? Va'avodum, right? They're going to serve them, meaning they're going to be slaves, servants. They're going to be the second-class citizens, as we call it. Similar to what we saw in our times in apartheid in South Africa, right? And this was in that was the American Civil War was all about, right? Are the Arabs, the African slaves, are they second-class citizens or not? Okay, so that was the Jewish people when they were in Mitzrayim, not initially, they came in 3 stages, as I'm going to explain in a minute, but there was a stage when they were servants, they were slaves, they were treated as second-class citizens. And then there was a 3rd stage, the invoisom, they were actually subjected to hard labor. And Chazal tell us, the Maisa, that these 3 things happened in separate stages. First of all, there was a tremendous chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that technically, according to what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Avram Avinu, they should have been subjected to all 3 for 400 years. Because that's what the pasuk says. Yodoya teida ki gei yerazarach be'eretz le'elohim va'avodim ve'in oisom arba me'el shona. They're going to be geirim and be servants and subjected to hard labor for 400 years. That's Pshuta Shamikra. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chazdoi mitigated the decree, and as a result of that, Lamaisa, how long were they actually in Mitzrayim? Were they Gerim Be'etz Elohim? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu considered that already from the birth of Yitzchak, the clock should start ticking on the 400 years from the birth of Yitzchak. Because even though Yitzchak lived his entire lifetime in Eretz Yisrael, but it was considered as if he wasn't in his own land. However, when did they leave Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Canaan at the time, and they went down to Mitzrayim? That was when Yaakov Avinu was 130 years old. And according to the Cheshbon, therefore, it came out that they were actually in Mitzrayim only for 210 years. That's why it says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we say that on the Seder night, Chishev es HaKetz. HaKadosh Baruch Hu calculated the end, when the end of the Egyptian exile should be. Now, the word Ketz is Kuf Tzadi, 190. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu calculated those 190 years and deducted them from the 400, that we're left with 210. And that was indicated to Yaakov Avinu, there were only going to be 210. He says, Redu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told, when Yaakov Avinu went down to Mitzrayim, he told him, Redu. Redu is Gematria 210. Reish is 200, Dalet is 4, Vav is 6, 210. So they were going to be in Mitzrayim for 210 years. So being in a foreign land, there were 210 years. How long were they avodim? Right? So that's what we see, Rashi mentions in this week's parasha, that they were only the shibud, meaning that were considered like slaves. They were made to be slaves, not necessarily even without hard labor, but just the slave stage, that started when Levi died. Levi died at the age of 137. There are different opinions exactly how old Levi was when he went down to Mitzrayim. It was anywhere between 43 and 44, something like that. So it comes out that the actual shibud was, if you deduct, it's a bit complicated, if Levi, let's say, was 44 when they came to Mitzrayim, and he was 137 when he died, that means he was 93 years, he lived 93 years in Mitzrayim. If you deduct 93 from 210, you're left with 117 years. So the actual shibud, right, was for 117 years. Only 117 years out of those 210 were the Jewish people slaves. And even when they were slaves, they weren't yet subject to hard labor. When did that hard labor start? So Chazal say that started at the same time as Miriam was born. Miriam, her name was Miriam, bitter. And that's what at the beginning of last week's parasha says, Vayamoraru es chayim. The Egyptians embittered the lives of the Jewish people. So that's when the hard labor started, and that was 86 years. That's from, Miriam was 86 at the time when they left Egypt. So that was 86 years. So we see in those three things which were told to Avraham Avinu that's going to happen to his descendants, there were three separate stages. There were Gerim, meaning foreigners in Mitzrayim for 210 years. There were slaves, had a slave status for 117 years, and they were subject to hard labor for 86. Now, I'm not sure I'm thinking 86 years, a nation to be subject to hard labor is pretty tough. Okay? But either way, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't put the full weight of the decree. HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitigated that decree. Says the Maharal that when the Jewish people were released from Mitzrayim, when the whole redemption process happened, the redemption happened in reverse process. Meaning, they originally, even before they left Mitzrayim, the hard labor already stopped. Sometime before. Says the Maharal, most Mepharshim agree with him, that as soon as the plague started, already the hard labor stopped. They were no longer subject to, as soon as the Makas Dam came about, so the Egyptians were so busy with their own, worrying about their own thing, no more hard labor. So Machlokes, it was 10 months before they left Egypt, or 12 months, but either way, already in those 10 months, no hard labor. Sometime during the plagues, already they were no longer considered avodim. Okay, I'm going to discuss this a little bit more. The Maral doesn't specify when they stopped being avodim, when they stopped being slaves. The Netziv says that was after Makas Borod. And now it's interesting why it's after Makas Borod, we'll see about that, okay? So the after Makas Borod, which was the 7th plague. Now what is interesting is that, I hope I'm going to have time to get to it, that it's many Mephorshim dwell on this point. Why are the Makkos divided up between 2 parshas? We've got parshas for Eiro, where there's 7. In this week's parsha, there's 7 plagues. And in next week's parsha, Parshas Boi, there are 3 plagues. Otherwise, you can always remember that 3 in Parshas Boi, because Boi is Gematria 3. Okay? So that's the only thing. There are 3 plagues in Parshas Boi, and 7 plagues in this week's parsha, Parshas Boi. So why does the Torah divide them up? Okay? Well, maybe as I shall come to. Anyway, the Netziv says that's when the shibud means they were no longer slaves. Already after Makas Borod, they were free men, but obviously they were still in Mitzrayim. The 3rd stage came about. That's when they were actually redeemed from Mitzrayim. That's the 3rd stage. Now it's actually meduik in the pasuk. So it says, if you look at the pasuk, it says, I will take you out mitachas sivlois Mitzrayim, from beneath the burdens of Mitzrayim. That indicates no more hard labor, no more burdens. But they're still slaves, still got a slave status. 2nd stage, I'm going to save you or deliver you from being servants to them. That's the 2nd stage. The 3rd stage, I'm going to redeem you. That means going out of Egypt. Now what's the 4th stage? And this is the culmination of everything. I will take you for me as a people. When did that happen? Very good. Right, at Har Sinai. That was the culmination. And really, this is before I should go into it, and if I have time, I'll start to dwell on this, that the whole purpose of the Egyptian bondage, that the Klal Yisrael had to go into the Egyptian exile and bondage, everything, was that we should go make a reverse process and achieve the ultimate, i.e., be willing to become Kadosh Baruch Hu's nation, willing to accept Oil Malchus Shamayim, which was a mountain. Yeah, so I want to point out at this point, why then is the 2 separate parashas, why 7 makkos are in this week's parasha, and in 3 makkos are in next week's parasha. Now, another interesting point to find the difference between the first 7 makkos, with the exception of 1, and the last 3 makkos. The last 3 plagues, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it says quite clearly, each time, the last 3 makkos, HaKadosh Baruch Hu hardened Paro's heart. Meaning, Paro of his own accord, after 7 plagues, he would have given up. He said, okay. And so if you look at the Lashon of the Pasuk in the beginning of next week's parasha, it says, Boyo Paro, ki ani ichbadati es libo es leva avodov, laman shisi oisesai ele bekirbo. Right? I've hardened his heart in order to increase, to place these wonders, these signs of mine in his midst. Meaning that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have let them already been finished with the Egyptians by punishing them after the 7 plagues. But now HaKadosh Baruch Hu has made Paro's heart heavy, right? Hardened Paro's heart in order, as the Apostle goes on to explain, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants the world to know who HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. And that's the whole union of Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's when the first time HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed to the entire world who's boss, without any questions. That's the whole opinion of Parshas Bo. That's the last 3 plagues. Now, interesting point is that of the 3 stages of exile, slavery and bondage and hard labor, which 2 were the Egyptians, shall we say, held responsible for? So for enslaving them, right, and subjecting them to hard labor. But for being in exile, for being in a foreign land, the Egyptians, that wasn't their fault. The Jewish people came of their own. Right? They were not deserving of punishment for that. So it's interesting that once the Egyptians no longer treated the Jewish people as slaves, so there shouldn't be any punishment for them. So therefore, after the first 7 plagues, when they already released them from being slaves, so technically the punishment as far as the Egyptians was concerned, that was finished, because they already released them. They were no longer slaves. So why was the HaKadosh Baruch Hu bring the last 3? That was for the 3rd stage, in order to release the people from Mitzrayim, to release the Jewish people, but that was not so much as far as punishing the Egyptians. The Egyptians had received their just deserts. This was in order that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should show all his wonders, to show the world HaKadosh Baruch Hu's in charge. So that's Parshas Bo. Was Parshas Va'era is punishment for the Egyptians. Parshas Bo is the redemption from Mitzrayim, and all that went with it. So that's the.
It would seem to be very harsh that they lost all their food and they lost their firstborn. That sounds like a punishment.
Yes, but then you've got the Rambam explains that since they didn't do tshuva till then, they became megalgalin chiyuv alidei chayav. Right? That means that they lost their power of bechira, so maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu used them as puppets for himself. Akoponim. I have still a few minutes. I want to explain this very important point, which, as I mentioned before, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu made 3 stages of exile, slavery, and hard labor, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised Avraham Avinu that's what's going to happen to his descendants. And in verse order, that's what the Jewish people were released from Egypt. Now, there's a famous question, which many Mefarshim dwell on. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu put us in Egypt and subject us to this? Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu tell Avraham Avinu that his descendants are going to have to be slaves? They're going to be in exile. They're going to be slaves, and they'll be subject to hard labor. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do it to Avraham Avinu? Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do it to us, to the Jewish people? So the Dubno Maggid has a famous mashal. He says, somebody had a deformed arm. Okay? And he wanted to, obviously he was handicapped, he couldn't use the arm properly. So he decided he's going to go to try and find the best doctor who can be able to fix his arm. So somebody tells him, listen, this doctor, he's the best surgeon, expert surgeon, he can fix it for you. So he arranges an appointment with this doctor, with this surgeon, and they go, finally has a meeting with him, appointment, and the surgeon examines his arm and he sees it, he says, okay, I'm willing to do the operation. It's going to cost you a lot of money. Finally, so he's arranged an appointment for him. Day comes, he comes to the operation. Anyway, prior to the operation, the doctor calls him in, the patient, and he says, I'm just going to explain to you what I'm going to do. She says, your arm is deformed. He says, I'm going to break it down in 3 places, and then I'm going to reset it. He gets furious. He says, that's what I'm paying you $20,000 for? To break my arm? Stupid man. He says, in order, if the arm is deformed, in order to put it right, you've got to break it first. And then, once you break it, then you can reset it and put it in the right thing. But when the arm is deformed, you can't leave it as it is. There's no way you can put it straight. You've got to first break it and then put it together. So says the Dubno Maggid, the Nimshal is, that's Klal Yisrael, when they Kosh Baruch Hu told Avraham Avinu, Klal Yisrael required to go through a refining process. And that's why Mitzrayim is called Kor HaBarza, an iron furnace. Meaning that in order for Klal Yisrael to become the nation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Am Hashem, in order to become the chosen people, we had to undergo a refining process in order that we should be willingly accept HaKadosh Baruch Hu's sovereignty and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Malchus Shamayim, the burden of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's of kingdom of the kingship of heaven. Meaning, to be a Jew, to be a good Jew, one has to keep 613 mitzvahs. And some of the things are not. Somebody who says, listen, I want to be my own boss, is not so willingly going to accept such a code of law. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to, in a way, break Klal Yisrael's gaiva, whatever gaiva, haughtiness, whatever feeling of self-importance the Jewish people had. Prior to that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to break them. He said, listen, you're nothings. I'm going to make you like the Havdil Elef Abdolis, right? Chasu Shalom, when somebody is suffering from Yena Machla, right? What do? Is they give a person chemotherapy. What's chemotherapy do? Right? It breaks the person's immune system, whatever. It breaks him, knocks it down completely, and it knocks down the cancer cells as well. But it knocks down the person till he's absolutely physically nothing, and then they build the person up, and hopefully only the good part will be rebuilt, and the bad cells will be permanently destroyed. Similarly, the whole Egyptian experience, shall we say, was this idea of a therapy for Klal Yisrael, that they should be in their self-importance, the fields of self-importance and self-identity should be totally knocked down to the ground, knocked into nothing, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu would then give them a new identity, a new self, that this way they will be willingly accept. You know who you are now? We're Am Hashem. We are the people of Hashem. I'll explain it to you. Let's go one step further. The Maharal explains as follows: that what was, in essence, Chazal say that, do you know why Jewish people had to go through the whole Egyptian bondage and everything, the whole Egyptian experience, was because Avraham Avinu asked, Bamo Eida, how will I know, right? Because he asked the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how will I know that my descendants will inherit the land? So, because he said, Bamo Eida, how will I know? HaKadosh Baruch Hu answered him, Yodoya Teda, you shall surely know that your descendants are going to be slaves in a foreign land. So the Mefarshim discuss it later. I mean, was Avraham Avinu being punished for being asked what I mean? Most Mefarshim said, when Avraham Avinu's question, that's where Rashi learns, it wasn't questioning HaKadosh Baruch Hu's whether he's going to give them the land. And that's the way Pashas where Rashi understands it as well. Avraham Avinu's question was, Avraham Avinu realized who he was, that he was the first person to recognize God by himself, Yehovah. V'hemin b'Hashem, that Avraham Avinu was the first person to come to recognition of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on his own. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, B'etzem, Adam Rishon also believed in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he was the one who had a clarity of who HaKadosh Baruch Hu was. But as a result of the sin of eating and being driven out of Gan Eden, he lost that clarity. And within a short time, because his descendants already served Avodah Zarah. What's Avodah Zarah mean? Avodah Zarah means you are serving, and that's the Rambam explains, that initially they didn't not believe in God. They wanted to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu through an intermediary. And therefore they lost that closeness and clarity of who HaKadosh Baruch Hu was. Avraham Avinu was the first person to regain, shall we say, that clarity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in charge of everything, and there's no need for intermediaries in order to come to have a connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu can be connected to directly. But Avraham Avinu's question was, I have managed to reach that level. How can I be sure that my descendants will also maintain that level of belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu? How will they have those kochas, the ability and the spiritual strength to maintain that closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Because Avraham Avinu's question in a way was legitimate, because he'd seen all the generations before him, and he'd seen that as soon as Adam Harishon, the first man, was driven out of Gan Eden, he was no longer in Gan Eden, he lost that clarity and closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Avraham Avinu's question was, how can I know that my descendants will maintain and be able to be Am Hashem, that they should have this closeness and ability to accept the yoke of heaven upon themselves? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Avraham Avinu, you're right. But you know what they're going to have to go through? They're going to have to go through a refining process. And it's not going to be a pleasant process. And the truth is, the Midrash says that according to the deeds and the merits of Klal Yisrael, that's how HaKadosh Baruch Hu measured how long there would have to be each stage of the Egyptian, I call it the exile experience they had to go through. Whereas if Klal Yisrael had enough merit, the hard labor stage would have been the minimal that would necessarily have to be. Since they weren't up to that, they had to be for 86 years. And the slavery had to be for, how long was it, 160, 170 years. And the actual exile had to be for 210 years. But had Klal Yisrael been on the level, in other words, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and the Shvatim, had they been on a level that they would have maintained the same level of closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as the Avos, right, themselves, then the slavery and, well, the Maisa is true, it's interesting. What's the correlation that when the Shvatim died, that's when the Shibud started? It's because when that generation was no longer there, Klal Yisrael lost that connection. They weren't on the same level, spiritual level, as they had been when the Shvatim were alive. Therefore, they needed now to really go to the next stage. They needed to be in Shibud, right? What was the cause for the next stage of the Vayimaras Chayim? I'm not sure. I don't know. But that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Avraham Avinu. Because you're right, Avraham Avinu. How are you going to know? In other words, that your descendants are going to maintain, they're going to be willing to become Am Hashem and be steadfast in their emunah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? They're going to have to undergo a refining process, which is not necessarily going to be easy for them. And this is basically the whole Pesach story. And that's why, when we say in the Haggadah, is the Machlokes. Because our ancestors, meaning Avram Avinu's ancestors, the generations between Adam Harishon and Avram Avinu, because they were over the Avodah Zarah, we had to get that out of our system. How did we get it out of the system? Avodim Hayim, we had to become slaves. That's how we got to get it out of our system. So basically, the cause was the result was Avodim Hayim. Everything is the same. That we start off. That was the bad part. We say the unpleasant part of the history of Klal Yisrael, but the pleasant part is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out from Mitzrayim. And Be'ez Hashem, B'Korov Mamish, we should see that tremendous exile which we've now gone through for the past close to 2,000 years. So all that together now, Baruch Hashem, all the Simonim are here, that Be'ez Hashem, we should be Meheira, see Mashiach will deliver us and redeem us forever.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt.